Anne Applebaum joins me now. She's a senior writer at The Atlantic and a fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of International Studies. She also wrote the important book, Twilight of Democracy, The Seductive Lure of Authoritarianism. And I wondered first of all, welcome to the show. I wondered when I saw this thing, I almost wondered, why would you do this? Why would you give this guy oxygen? But as soon as I started reading it, I understood what you were doing here. You were telling us how he operates, how he ticks, and it was compelling right from the beginning. He does believe this. He's not manipulative for the sake of it. He believes this stuff.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think there are different categories of people in that world, and some of them are clearly cynical. He's not one of them. I originally wanted to meet him because I've written several books about Soviet communism and about Stalinism, and I'd had a lot of historical experience with true believers in genuinely wrong or evil ideas. And I thought this was the chance to meet one of them in real life. And his genuine confidence comes from a lot of things. One of them is from his own success. You know, he's a self-made businessman who was previously a crack addict. He overcame his addiction. He achieved a lot of success in his life, and he believes that success and that record gives him special access to information and to the truth. He's also probably been manipulated by other people. I can't prove that, but somebody seems to have given him some data that he genuinely believes proves that the Chinese stole our election. And this is a new conspiracy theory from him. You might hear more about it in August because he's spending a lot of money in the second week of August promoting this idea.
Well, in fact, August 13th, he says that the Friday the 13th is when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will resign from office as a result of information that he's going to present August 10th to 12th. You actually asked him about this. You said, do you understand? He said this. He said, do you understand I've been attacked? I have 2,500 employees. I've been attacked every day. Do I look like a stupid person that I'm just doing this for my health? I have better things to do. These guys brought me this, and I owe it to the United States, to all, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican or whoever it is, to bring this forward to the country. You asked him, what happens if the information he's been given, doesn't turn out to be true? What did he say?
He said, it's impossible. I can't be wrong. There's no way it's wrong. Don't you understand? The expression he used was non-subjective. This is a non-subjective set of facts. I did call up other people. I talked to several other people about what it was that he could have or what he thinks he had, and there are various speculations. But the main point is that all of the elections that were challenged, all the votes were counted and audited by hand. This was in Georgia more than once. There is no way that there was something happened inside the machines and the machines somehow stole the election. So fundamentally, what he's saying happened cannot have happened. And yet he believes exactly the opposite. And not only that, he believes that all of the challenges he's received, including from people like me and from people like you, all these challenges are further proof that it's true. In other words, he's attracting all this negative attention because what he's saying is true. So he cannot be convinced otherwise. And I'm afraid that mentality, I know I'm right, I can't be convinced by anything, there's no rational argument that can sway me. That mentality is very important for everyone to understand right now, because there's a chunk of Americans who feel that same way about the election. They feel that way about the vaccines. They feel that way about information. They're absolutely impervious to any challenge to their views.
And in fact, in things that you've studied in the past, this has come up again. From your article, you write, the opprobrium and rancor he has brought down upon himself for trying to make his case are, in Lindell's mind, further proof that it is true. Stalin once said that the emergence of opposition signified the intensification of the class struggle, and this is Lindell's logic, too. If lots of people object to what you're doing, then it must be right. He brings the zeal of a convert to the conversation. He quotes the Bible a lot. He's a religious guy. Is he critical? Does he take any critical eye to this stuff that he's believing, or is it because it's in pursuit of his cause as a conservative that he wants it to be true?
I mean, he's very critical of the Republican Party. And you may have seen a couple of days ago, he said something, I don't know whether it's going to prove true or not, that he was removing advertising from Fox News because Fox News will not push or promote his conspiracy theory or his presentation of evidence, which, as you said, takes place in August. So he's critical of plenty of people, and he actually suspects that many leading Republicans, like leading Democrats, are secretly working for the Chinese Communist Party. That was another thing that we discussed. But he is not at all critical towards the information that he thinks he has, or towards his very deep and profound belief that Trump will soon become president again. He can't explain by what mechanism this will happen, what's the constitutional way that it will happen, but he believes that the Supreme Court will vote 9-0. I don't know how or under what circumstances, but it will happen, and Trump will become president. And he's somebody who has had these visions before. He had a dream in which he saw himself standing next to Donald Trump, and then that dream became reality. And so he's someone who believes that he has a special gift and insight, and that this will all come true. And it is simply not possible to talk him out of it. And as I said, unfortunately, I think that's something that you can see among other similarly minded people in our country.
How influential is he?
I can't measure it. I think there's more to these conspiracy theories. They have a bigger reach than people who are outside of that bubble believe. I actually met him at Steve Bannon's studio. Bannon's podcast is rated in the top 50 or 60 podcasts on Apple, and that means it probably has millions of viewers, and so he's reaching millions of listeners. Sorry, so he's reaching millions of people. He's somebody who has a big presence on TV. He's a trusted figure. He's a nice guy who sells pillows. I mean, what's not to like? And so I think he probably, around the margins, at least what he can do is convince people to have less faith in our democracy and less faith in our electoral system. And of course, that lack of faith and that lack of belief is something that can be used in 2022 or more likely 2024 to once again undermine the results and once again seek to overturn the results of the election. And
that's full circle to the things that you have studied in your past, which makes it important to read your book. And good to see you. Thanks for this work. Anne Applebaum is a Pulitzer Prize winning historian. She's a staff writer for The Atlantic and author of several books